Yeah, as we get started, we're going to do a little bit of recap from last week. I'm glad that you're back here with us today. I hope you learned something new and that you have a good time. We are covering the second half of working on pianos in the sense of figuring out how they're put together, how they're built, specifically Steinway, which is a fancy piano model. But a lot of pianos are put together mostly the same way. Now, let's do a little bit of review from last week. Last week, we covered the frame of the piano, which is like the shell on the outside, how they laminate that, how they put that together, and then they put it in a giant press and to force it into the shape. Then they took that and they put some legs on it, and they put a soundboard and a bridge down into it. And that's the part that makes the sound. And the soundboard itself and the bridge, oh, where'd you go, Miles? The soundboard and the bridge are the parts where the sound comes from the string through the bridge into the soundboard and then out into the air where we hear it. So we've got the body, the frame, or the cabinet, we like to call that part, the cabinet for the piano. Then we put the soundboard down inside, and the soundboard has a bridge on it. And then we kind of wrapped up talking about the plate, the cast iron plate that goes down into the piano. Miles, are you familiar with cast iron? Does your mom have like a cast iron cooking pot or pan that she uses once in a while? I'm gonna unmute you real quick. Oh no, I can't do it. All right. Well, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Oh, there we go.
We have one, but we don't use it in practice.
Okay.
I don't think Miles would recognize it.
Okay, well, maybe sometime today or tomorrow you can go take a look at it. That's what the plate is made out of, and that's what we're going to talk about today. They make pans with it, they make pianos with it, they make big bells with it. There's lots of things you can do with cast iron. It's very strong, but it can be a little bit brittle sometimes. So we are, go ahead.
Speaking of which, do you think it's time to keep watching that video we watched last week?
Yes, that's what we're doing right this second. We are switching over there.
I'm gonna unmute.
Okay. All right, so here it is. Here is the plate being lowered on the piano. For the sake of understanding what's going on, I'm going to back it up a little bit so we can see the beginning of the plate. Here we go.
One important component is the iron plate, cast from Bell quality iron in one piece from our exclusive patents. The soundboard with its bridge and the cast iron frame are now assembled inside the piano rim, or the belly of the piano, by a man called the belly man. It is an involved process to get the soundboard correctly placed and the bridge height precisely determined, so that the pure Swedish steel strings we use will have the correct downward pressure or bearing on the bridge all across the scale.
Okay, so the bridge, did you see how, oh, I'm sorry, not the bridge, the plate. Did you see how in order to put it into the piano, they had a crane reach down and pick it up and then maneuver into the piano and lower it down? Why do you think they used a crane?
Because if they didn't, it would probably, because it would have to be used properly.
Well, they want to be careful with it. Sure, there's a couple things about cast iron that we should know. One, if you drop it, if you have a huge piece of cast iron and you drop it, it might break. So that's problem number one. They want to make sure that it doesn't get dropped or bumped too hard, okay? Number two, look how tightly the edges of it fit into the piano. Is there room to put your fingers down beneath that plate right now?
No!
No, so if you're holding it and you lift it up and put it into the piano, it'll squish your fingers. Not a good place to be with squished fingers. That's a big no-no, okay? Now, the third reason, and this might be one of the biggest reasons also, they're all super important, but the plate is extremely heavy. It's cast iron. To make cast iron, you take crude iron and you mix a little bit of a coal or carbon into it, and you melt it down, and then you pour it into a mold to create the shape that you want. And in this case, it's the plate for the piano. So it's little more than crude iron that's been reshaped in a specific way. It's been cast into a shape, and so it's very, very heavy. Miles, how much do you think this plate weighs?
10 pounds?
It can weigh anywhere between 500 and 1,000 pounds in an average piano.
1,000 was my guess, but I thought that was silly.
Well, you were spot on the first time. It can be in a piano of a larger size. It can be up to 1,000 pounds. It's extremely heavy, and is probably the heaviest part of the piano. So instead of having 10 plus guys try to pick it up and stick it in there and smash their fingers, instead they have a crane help them lift it up out of the piano or set it in. Okay, so that covers the plate inside the soundboard. And what they have to do is because they put it in and they make sure everything's good. And if it's not quite right, they take it back out and they work on it some more. And then they put it back in and out and in and out and in until the soundboard, the bridge, and the cast iron plate all fit together perfectly. And then on the last time they put it in, you see how this one's black? That's what cast iron's color is. The last time they put it in, they paint it. All right. So, do you have any questions right this second about the soundboard, the bridge, or the plate that goes into the piano?
No.
No. Okay. So the plate, very large, very heavy. You use a crane to put it into the piano, pick it up and take it out. And it goes in and out and in and out a bunch of times while they work on it. Here's the next segment. And at this point, the plate has been painted and they're going to move on to the next part of building the piano, which is putting the strings onto the piano. And it takes a couple of days to do that. It's a long process. Let's hear about it.
The bridge, all across the scale. The next step in making a piano is adding the strings. The traditional method of stringing by hand is combined with modern technology. The center and upper strings, 3 for each note, are stopped off by the duplex at a precise relative length to the main string speaking length and vibrate in harmony. This duplex scale pattern delivers a richness of sound that is characteristically Steinway. The action assembly is mounted.
Okay, so the strings was not a complicated process necessarily. Let's go back and let's talk a little bit about that. So the strings are attached right here on the end of the piano. Let me go full screen on my end. Right here. You see my mouse? Okay, the strings are attached on one end right there. They're fed up and over the bridge and then down under this part of the plate right here, which is called the capo. And here's another view of it. That's that plate right there. They go straight across and then down under the capo and then back up into the tuning pins. And then it's wrapped around the tuning pin, and then this machine, watch this machine right here.
Precise relative length.
It's gonna take the string after it's been wrapped up and drive it, slam it down into the piano.
To the main string speaking length and vibrate in harmony. This duplex scale pattern delivers a richness of sound that is characteristically Steinway.
There it goes again.
The action assembly.
Okay, so the strings, there's a couple of different components that go into working with your strings. So strings are primarily made of steel. That's the main component. Usually it's a stainless steel or some variant of that, especially these days. But a lot of strings out there nowadays have different things in them. They can be steel and aluminum, or maybe tin, maybe some silver. There's lots of different materials that we can make strings out of. And then some of them, the fancier ones, they take a piece of copper wire and they wrap it around the string to make it bigger and denser and heavier. Miles, do you have any questions about the strings?
What are they made out of?
Usually steel, and they can come from anywhere. In this particular video.
Steel.
Say that again?
How can a string be made from steel?
So what you do to make a string from steel is you take a sheet of steel or a piece of steel, and you melt it down and stretch it. And then you heat it up and stretch it. And you heat it up and stretch it until it becomes a long, slender piece of metal. And then you can grind it down, sand it down into the exact diameter that you want. And now you have a flexible piece of steel, a string. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. You can do it with steel, you can do it with gold, you can do it with any metal. And it's easier to make strings with things like yarn, right? You weave it together, you wind it up, and you can stretch it out and make a string. In this particular case, they melted down steel and stretched it out, kept stretching it until it got to the thickness they wanted. Now, some of the special strings are wound with different things. And again, it can be copper, it can be silver, it can be gold, it could be any number of things, okay? And I think they might talk about that a little bit more, but now let's take a look at the next section here in our video. They're gonna go back to talking about the action a little bit, and I still have my action model is out here somewhere. I'm gonna show you that too, but now they're talking about how they put together the inside of the piano, the part that does all the moving. When you press the keys, the parts that move, and that's what he's gonna talk about. That's what they're putting together right now. This is my favorite part. Let's take a listen.
Is mounted on a tubular metallic action frame, another Steinway distinctive patented feature. The hammers for the action assembly are cut from a tapered sheet of felt. A set of hammers is placed in a press and the felt forced into shape for gluing to hammer moldings. All Steinway hammers are made in the Steinway factory. After hammers are glued to the hammer shanks, the whole action assembly and the key frame must be carefully put together and fitted into the instrument. Careful precision is important here because the position of the hammers is vital for their proper striking point on the strings. Measuring the depth of keys travel is another important phase of the regulating process. Special gauges are used to measure the proper depth of touch. Key depth travel is critical. One of the main features of the grand action is those important little half-round bearings on which the keys balance. They're shaped so that the touch point where the key rests on the bearing moves backwards as the key is depressed. This allows for fast return to playing position, another Steinway patent. It's called the Steinway Accelerated Action.
Okay, there's a lot of really dense information in there. Let me break that down a little bit for you, okay? So let's go back to sort of the beginning of that section. So after they finished putting the strings in and they got the plate all done, now they work more on the inside of the piano and they take what they call the action.
Steinway. The action is,
which is this assembly right here, this long piece of metal. And it's a frame that holds all of those moving parts that we work with together. It holds the hammers, it holds the key, it holds all of the equipment that we use on the inside of the piano in order to make the mechanics of the piano work. That's what they're putting together right now. And this is the frame that they attach all of that to.
Assembly is mounted on a tubular metallic action frame, another Steinway distinctive patented feature.
Once they finish the frame, they come and they make the hammers. And I think it was you who asked last week, how do they make the hammers? What are the hammers made out of? Well, this long piece right here is a long strip of felt, which is like hair from sheep. It's wool. And they put a bunch of glue on the inside, and then they put a stick of wood, and then they glue it together. They clamp it. Take a look.
Hammers for the action assembly are cut from a tapered sheet of felt. A set of hammers is placed in a press, and the felt forced.
There it is. It's clamped into place, and it's going to sit for maybe a day or two and dry together. Then
into shape for gluing to hammer moldings.
They take it out and they take this slicing machine and they cut each of the hammers out separately from that long piece of felt.
All Steinway hammers are made in the Steinway factory. After hammers are glued to the hammer shanks, the whole action assembly and the key frame must be carefully put together and fitted into the instrument.
All right, so there it is, all put together. You've got the action frame, you've got all the keys, you've got the hammers on their shanks, the whip-ins are put in there. This is the finished product after you go through all of those steps and you put the piano action together. It goes into the piano, but they're not done yet. They have to make a bunch of adjustments. They have to make sure the keys go down as far as they should, but not farther. And one of the hardest parts, making sure all the keys sit at exactly the same height so that it's easy to play.
Careful precision is important here because the position of the hammers is vital for their proper striking point on the strings. Measuring the depth of keys travel is another important phase of the regulating process. Special gauges are used to measure the proper depth of touch. Key depth travel is critical.
So in that previous clip and in this one right here, what they're doing is you see all those green things underneath the keys? Do you see those green things, Miles? All those green round things right underneath the keys? What they're doing is taking those out and putting different sizes in to make sure that they get the perfect size for the piano, and to make sure that the keys go down the right distance, not too far and not too shallow.
One of the main features of the grand action is those important little half-round bearings on which the keys balance.
And these bearings right here, they make sure the keys are at the same height and that they rock forwards and backwards correctly.
They're shaped so that the touch point where the key rests on the bearing moves backwards as the key is depressed. This allows for fast return to playing position, another Steinway patent. It's called the Steinway Accelerated Action.
Okay, so now they've put the piano together. It's got strings, it's got keys, it's got the action in it. Some of it's been painted at this point. So now what they do, have you ever heard, Miles, the term of breaking something in? Have you heard that before? No? Well, it's a term we use when we have something brand new, but we have to use it a little bit before it actually begins to work right. So maybe like a baseball glove, or anything mechanical, a car, some toys. You have to use it a little bit to break it in, to make it work. What are some things, Miles, that you have had that you had to use a little bit to get it to loosen up or relax, maybe like shoes or something like that, in order for it to work correctly or be comfortable?
I'm not sure yet.
Not sure? Well, for me, things like shoes. When I buy a new pair of shoes, I have to break them in. I have to wear them for a few days before they kind of mold to the shape of my foot, and they're easier to wear. I had mentioned a baseball glove. When you get a brand new glove, it's very stiff, it's very hard, and you have to wear it for a couple weeks sometimes for it to break in. Hats, too. Sometimes hats are really stiff around the inside, and wearing them for a few days helps loosen them up, and they fit your head better. Those are some things that take some time to break in. So in this next clip, what they're going to do, they are going to break in the piano for you to make sure that everything works just right. Let's see how they do that. It's a lot of fun. I think it's kind of funny. Let's look.
When all adjustments have been made, the piano is moved to a soundproof room to meet an 88 rubber-fingered mechanical device to break in the action over the entire scale. And now...
Okay, that was a short little segment. They use a special machine. It's basically got a bunch, 88 little fingers that go and play the piano over and over and over again to make sure everything works, everything moves right, and the piano sounds good. Let's watch that again.
To meet an 88 rubber-fingered mechanical device to break in the action.
So you see how it's got those fingers, and it's going up and down and up and down and up and down, and it's playing all of those keys and cycling through all of their movements to make sure they all work correctly.
For the entire scale.
That's what it looks like inside the piano. All the parts are moving and flying around. What do you think these little wooden bricks are for on the top?
To help pull down those black things.
Kind of. What those little bricks are for, they've got a piece of red felt across the bottom. So when you lay them across the strings, it helps make the strings really quiet. Because if you can imagine sitting on a piano and banging on it all day long, it would be really loud and really obnoxious.
Oh.
So while all of these people are trying to work and put pianos together, they try to make these pianos inside this prep room as quiet as possible. So they put all these pads and these bricks over the top to help bring the volume down.
And now for the voicing.
Okay, so now the piano's broken in, it's all put together. Now they're going to start a process called voicing, which is where they go through and they make sure the piano sounds good. Have you ever done something before and it turned out correct, but it looks kind of funny or it sounds kind of funny? For me, it might be something I go to draw or color something, and I finish and I thought I used all the right colors and I thought it looked good, and I get to the finished product and I look at it and I go, well, something's not quite right. Have you ever done that before, Miles?
I'm not sure.
Not sure? Are you certain? There's nothing that you've done, especially in the last couple of weeks, that maybe didn't turn out quite right and you had to go back and fix it a little bit? Nothing at all. Well, I'm glad that you get your projects done the first time around.
Well, okay, maybe
Or-
writing.
Or some of your like math worksheets.
And my math wish.
Okay, well, there you go. Working through maybe like a math page or something, and you go back through and there's a couple, it's mostly right, but there's a couple of mistakes. So, we go through and we fix those real fast and we make sure it's all correct. Well, that's what this guy is going to be doing in this next little part. He's going to take all the pieces that everybody's put together and he's going to go through and make sure, one, it's all working correctly, and two, that it sounds the absolute best that it can. Let's see what he does.
The resiliency of each hammer is crucial. Each is tried note by note, and the action removed, and the hammer subjected to a sticking with a 3-needle device to adjust its resiliency.
Now, that's probably the biggest part. He takes this device, it's got these needles on it, and he's poking the hammers. He's stabbing the hammers to make them softer. Maybe they hit the string, and that string is super, super loud, but the other ones around it are quiet. Well, he pokes the hammer, makes the top of it softer, so that that one's not so loud.
The action is put back and tone tested again. This process is repeated until the entire keyboard is even in tone quality.
So this process is called voicing, and to do voicing properly, everything's got to be put together absolutely rightly, and the piano has to be 100% in tune. So up to this point, they just put the strings on. So before they do this, they go through and they tune the piano almost a dozen times to get the strings to stretch and go correctly to where they're supposed to be.
In expert hands, the Steinway piano is brought to tonal perfection. Actually, each piano will have its own tonal flavor, with various predominant qualities, such as brilliance, mellowness, warmth, roundness of tone, and the like.
Okay, that's pretty much the end of the video. There's a little bit there. We can finish that up if we have some time. But that's how they put the end of the piano together. Once they put it all together, someone goes through and makes sure it works completely and it's absolutely correct. And then they go through and they make sure it sounds perfect. And by this time it's painted, it's tuned, it's polished and finished up, and then it'll go out onto a showroom floor where somebody can come in and play it and try it and see if they like it. Or for a lot of these pianos, they put them in boxes and they wait for someone to want one or to buy one. And then they take it out and you can play it and listen to it. And if you don't like it, they put it back in the box and do it again. And what he was saying right there at the end of the video is every single piano is a little bit different. They're not all the same. What are some things that you can think of that are always the same no matter what happens?
Sorry.
That's okay. What are some things that you can think of that are always the same every time?
Well, my life.
Your life? What does that mean?
Well, okay, maybe not my life, but
How about Lego kits? Do you like Legos?
I'm not one of those big builders kinds of people.
Do you ever do those paint by numbers?
No, not really. They seem.
No, not really. Well, let's think about some things that are all different. What are some things that are always different? Are all people the same?
No.
No, all of us are different. Some of us have long hair, some of us have short hair, some of us have blue eyes, some of us have green eyes. And that's because each one of us is made of different parts that are slightly different, that are a little bit different. And in a piano, it's exactly the same way because you have so many people doing all of this stuff by hand. It's not done by machine. They do everything by hand. And so each time it turns out just a little bit different every single time. And so each piano, like a person, has its own personality. Some of them are louder and bigger sounding, and some of them are sweet and gentle. Some of them are really balanced between the two. Some of them are bright and harsh. Some of them are really soft and maybe even hard to hear. All pianos are a little bit different in that sense, especially like these ones that are handmade. And they're put together by hand, they're carved by hand, all the pieces are done with somebody's hands. And machines help them, sure, but it's still 90% of it done by hand. Somebody put it all together. All right, Mr. Miles, now is a great time for questions. Have there been any interesting things that we want to talk about some more?
No.
Are there things that you saw? None at all? Were there things that you saw that you have questions about?
Miles, you don't have any questions?
Well, just one.
What is it?
Who was the person who invented the piano?
I missed the first part.
Who was the person who invented the piano?
Oh, that's a great question. So that goes back to the way early 1700s and maybe the late 1600s. There was this guy. His name is kind of funny. His name was Bartolomeo Cristofori. Bartolomeo Cristofori, and that was about 300 years ago, a little bit longer than 300 years ago. And the instruments that they had at the time, I'm going to play a little bit for you. On my keyboard, I have a couple of different sounds. They had two instruments primarily. One sounded like this. Not the best sounding instrument, but it was a keyboard instrument. They had another one called the organ, and it sounded like this.
I knew what the I already know what.
You already know what it is. Excellent. But
We
the
sometimes
organ,
use one for weddings.
right, you might use one for weddings. But the problem with the organ and the harpsichord was that no matter how hard or soft you pressed the key, you'd only get one volume out of it unless you reached over and pulled some levers or turned some knobs. And so Cristofori, who was a harpsichord, I believe a harpsichord player, he said, well, I want to be able to press it really hard and it makes a loud sound, or press it really soft and it makes a soft sound. And so he decided, I'm going to build a new kind of instrument. And it took him a long time, many, many years, but he finally created an instrument that he called the pianoforte, which was called the loud and soft instrument because it could play loud and soft at the same time, which was unique for keyboard instruments that hadn't been done yet in a successful way. Now, the early pianos were not like the ones we have today. They were much smaller, a lot simpler. But over time, they developed into what we have today, these huge mechanical masterpieces that we call pianos. And we dropped the word forte from the name, so we don't call it the pianoforte anymore. We generally just call it the piano or a piano. And over time, they got bigger, and they got longer, and they got more intense as far as piano goes. So Bartolomeo Cristofori is the guy who invented the piano. He came up with the concept, and he built it. And I believe his sons helped him too and developed more of the piano as a project afterwards. So he built a couple and then his sons built some more and they just kept getting bigger and better over time. That's where the piano came from. That's who invented the piano.
Okay.
All right. So we've talked about the piano history. We've talked about how the pianos are made. Next week, we're going to dive a little bit farther into how pianos work. We've gone over how they're put together, the materials that they use to build them, how long it takes. How long, at this point now, how long do you think it's been to build a piano? Remember from last time, it had to dry for at least 6 months to a year. And then they had to mold it into the cabinet, and then that had to dry for another 3 to 6 months. So up to last time, it's been about a year and a half, and we don't have a piano yet. Now with all of this extra work, how much longer do you think it is?
What do you think, Miles?
I think it's like 3 years.
3 more years? Not quite that long.
Well, I mean 2 more months.
2 more months? 2 more months it could be, depending on the size of the piano. If it's a little piano, maybe a couple weeks to a couple months. If it's a huge piano, it might be a little bit longer. It might be up to 6 more months to put all of it together. So in short, it can take, to hand make a piano, it can take anywhere between 1.5 to 2 years to put it together. That's a long time. That's a very long time. But when you take the time to do that, it comes out really nice. Now, what do you think pianos that are made in a shorter amount of time, how well do you think they're put together? Do you think they're better or not as good?
Okay.
Let me ask again. Pianos that they make in under a year, do you think they're usually better or usually not as good as pianos that take a long time to make?
I think it's better.
They're generally not as good. They're not as well put together because not as much time and care went into making them. But it depends. It depends on the company and who's putting them together. All right, Mr. Miles, now is the time. If you have any other questions or any other thoughts or anything else that you want to talk about pianos.
I don't have anything else.
Nothing else? Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's class. I hope you learned some new and fun things about the piano. And I look forward to doing some more piano stuff with you next week. Next week will be part 3, more of how pianos work, now that we know how they're built, how they're made, and how they're put together. Miles, you've done an excellent job today, and I look forward to seeing you next week.